Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Ballistics. Today we're going to be talking about powder and if you're actually using a good powder for your setup. I know a lot of guys, when they start off hand loading, just walk into the store, they see all of these powders and are completely lost as to what powder goes with what rifle. And then they look at the bottle and they're like, oh, okay, that's got load data, there's load data, and there's load data. So hey, that must be correct. That must be the perfect load for my rifle. Or they come here and they just flip open the book. Let's say, oh, 270 short mag. Perfect. That's what I want. Let's say I want to shoot 130 grain. So they go through, they look at the powders available that they can find. And oh, look, I've got that. It's on the load data. Let's try that and see how it works. And sometimes that gives us the best groups. We match velocities great. Sometimes what's in the book isn't actually going to be what works well. When I started loading the 6.5 Creedmoor, I did like most people. I came to my load book. I started looking through powders and I was like, hey, 4831, I have that. But that's a Magnum powder. That is a super slow burning powder. Now, could it possibly work? Yeah, but is it going to be great in the Creedmoor? Probably not. So I kept looking. Oh, look, H4350. Boom. We have H4350. But if you look through that, there's no Stayball 6.5, which claims is ideal for the 6.5 Creedmoor. We know Superformance and IMR 4350 also work. So that's kind of the first point I wanted to make. Just because your load book doesn't have a powder or says that the powder will work doesn't mean that it's going to be the best powder for that gun. When taking a look at the different powders and things that we'll be using, there's three big indicators as to if that powder is going to be a good powder or not. The first one is the maximum pressure that we will have. If we are way over pressure or way under pressure, that powder is obviously not going to work. But then the next two things to look at for is this powder going to be an ideal powder or not is going to be that number of load ratio, which is how full is the case going to be, and the burnt propellant. If we have less than, I would say 94, 95%, don't even try that powder. It's probably not going to shoot great. And if the case is half full, again, it's not going to be a great powder to have. So we want to be 95% plus in that category. Ideally, if we can be up around 99, 100% either burn rate and load ratio, then we're looking at an ideal powder. So in this case here, we have a 308 Winchester loaded with H4350 and N133. The H4350 obviously is not a good load because we are way under pressure for one. Then the next thing though is the burnt propellant is 83%. That is not a very good amount. And then load ratio, yeah, the case is full, but that's because this powder is way too slow. But then we come down to the N133 and we see that not only is it right around that max pressure, but the case is 99.8% full and it's burning all of that propellant. It's going to be more efficient, and chances are a load right around that mark will shoot very well. So again, stay under pressure. Don't go way too low in pressure, don't go way over pressure, but also try to fill that case and burn all of the propellant so that you can get that consistent, efficient burn. Taking a look here at this nozzler load data, we have the 6.5 Creedmoor with 140 to 142 grain bullet. On this list, I want to draw your attention to IMR 4895. That seems to be a powder that is fairly accurate in the 6.5 Creedmoor, and it seems to be pretty common in the low datas in the different weights. But is it realistically going to be the best powder for this gun? Probably not. It is going to be going pretty slow, which out at range is going to affect the ballistics. So let's take a look. 140 grain Boat tail hollow point by Hornady, but this one is using 4895 powder. 140 grain boat tail hollow point by Hornady. So taking a look here at these two different loads with those two powders, we can see IMR 4895 is the top and that Stayball 65 is the bottom. The IMR 4895 is right about the same pressure as the Stayball 65, so we're good there. But the biggest difference comes in that load ratio number. The load ratio for 4895 is 85%. That case has a lot of empty space, which can lead to inconsistent burns. You're not going to have as good of a chance of finding accuracy. Versus we look at that Stayball 6.5 load, we're at 96 and 98%. So obviously there is a lot of room to improve on that load. There's still that 2% that we are lacking in both burn rate and in case fill, but it's going to be a better load. And we see that not only in the video with the different velocities, but also we'll take a look at what that does ballistically, having that difference. Taking a look between these two powders, there's quite the difference in velocity from the muzzle. Now, what does that mean out at range? As we get out to 250 yards, that difference is still right around 300 feet per second, and that equates to over 3 inches of drop difference between the two powders. Then getting out to 500 yards, it's even worse than that. The velocity is going to be about the same again, but that drop, just under 20 inches of drop is the difference. Now, that might not seem like a whole lot, but as we get out further and further, that number is just going to grow. So realistically, muzzle velocity and your powder selection has a huge influence over the downrange ballistics. Now, when I can't find load data for something in a manual or online, I turn to Gordon's reloading tool. This tool is awesome. You can edit the case capacity, your overall length, things like that, so that it is custom to your gun. And then you can put the powder you want and the charge weight. What I would like to draw the attention to here, though, is that load ratio and that burnt propellant down in the bottom right. Ideally, we want these numbers to be above 98, 99. Realistically, if we want the ideal powder, they're both going to be 100%. We want to fill that case so we can get consistent burns and consistent velocities, but then we want to burn all the propellant. So, Hodgdon Superformance is not an ideal powder for the 6.5 Creedmoor. However, in my gun, it shoots half MOA consistently. It's almost always sub MOA. So realistically, you kind of have to use what your gun likes, but Hodgdon Superformance, it's not an ideal powder. 143 ELDX out of the Tikka T3X. Shot 1 was 28.25. Here's shot 2. Now, that Superformance load might make velocity and shoot really well out of my gun, but realistically, it's not an ideal powder. So in other guns, it may not function as well as it does in mine. Now, a powder that will more than likely function across the board, because it is more of an ideal powder, is Vita Vori N550. If we take a look down at that bottom right corner, we can see that the load ratio is 95.8%. So the case isn't as full as we would like to see it, but we are burning all of the powder. And not only that, but we're getting similar pressures and similar velocities. So hopefully this would work just a little bit better and hopefully be a little more consistent than the Superformance load, but the only way to find out really is to get out and test it. So do I think we just need to scrap the loading manuals? No. Loading manuals are there. They're a good place to get started and get an idea of what safe charge weights are going to look like with different powders. Now, I think load manuals do a great job at giving us an idea of powder ideas and kind of where to start with loads and typically where you should probably stop. But combining the loading manual with something like Gordon's reloading tool, it can lead you to find different gems and things like I did with this Hodgdon Superformance. It is a great powder for my application, and going through the load manuals and Gordon's reloading tool, I was able to find that. But realistically, it's not the ideal powder. It just works in my case because we want to try to get that case as close to capacity as we can without going over pressure, and we want to be able to burn all of that powder. So if you can find those two things in a powder, I think you found your ideal powder. Thanks for watching.